Sorry. I would like to welcome everybody, particularly those who are tuning in on YouTube. All two of them, I think, was last week or something like that. Rick's promise to make me a star is, well, it's probably going to come a little later. We will do a little background from chapter 37 before we begin on 38, because I want to deal with families this morning and the sale of Joseph. I'd like to look at that again by his brothers to the Midianite merchantmen. Do you remember that part of the story? Who are also called Ishmaelites. Did you notice that as you were reading the 37th chapter? Midian, you have your maps from last week. You know, I looked at my notes from last week after I got home, and probably a good thing I left them on my desk after I looked them over. If you will look at your maps, you will see in the middle of the map to the Sinai Peninsula, between the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba, and you will see Midian, which sits over just across the Gulf. Actually, Midian, that country, goes up to the top of the Gulf of Aqaba and extends into the Sinai Peninsula. Now, that's a place named for a person. Does the name Midian ring any bells for anybody from earlier in the book of Genesis?
I don't know.
He is the fourth son of Abraham, that Abraham has with his wife Keturah. That's Midian. And that's where he went to settle, and so that area is named for him. Ishmael, the Ishmaelites that are mentioned here are Ishmaelites who lived in Midian, but Ishmael is never granted a country. He is a people, but not a country. He's not geographically located. That was part of the prophecy that was given, that his hand would be against his brothers would be against him, he would live by, well, basically, they're there. Israel has been taken out of the land twice. Ishmael's people has never left. They're Bedouins, they're still there, okay? Now, we'll take up our story in chapter 38 as God's people acting badly. And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went in unto her. And she conceived and bare a son. And he called his name and she conceived again and bare a son, and she called his name Onan. And she yet again conceived and bare a son, and called his name Shelah, and he was at Shizah when she bare him. And Judah took a wife for her. So you'll notice there the passage of time. Okay? His firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Okay, this is Judah's firstborn, right? Okay? And Judah said unto Onan, go in unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his, and it came to pass when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. Then said Judah to Tamar his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house till Shelah my son be grown, for he said, lest peradventure he die also as his brethren did, and Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Now I'd like to stop there at verse 11 for a minute, go back. And let's have a look at what's going on. Judah, the first thing it tells us about him is that he's now departed from his brothers. Literally, it's brothers. Now, where's Joseph at this point?
Well,
He's in Egypt.
sold.
Yeah, he's down in Egypt.
Right.
So that leaves 11 brothers, including Benjamin, at home in their land of Canaan there, which they're going to inherit. But Judah, for whatever reason, leaves them. And he goes down and turns into a certain Adulamite. Now, there is some question about exactly where this occurred. Some will say it is far north as what is eventually is allotted to Dan in northern Israel. The caves of Adullam are where Jerusalem sits at the top of the Judean hills, Mount Zion up there. You have the break of that summit, that mountain range that goes down to the Dead Sea. The caves of Adullam are on that far side, on the east side of the Judean mountain range. It could be either one of those. We're not sure. But first mistake, this family, which is told to be separate, beginning with Abraham, he leaves and he goes out and turns into an Adulamite, and they become very close friends. Then he sees a certain Canaanite whose name, the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name is Shua. Now please understand, Shua is not the name of the daughter.
No.
Shua is the name of the father.
Father, yeah.
Judah's wife is not named. The Er's wife, the daughter-in-law is, but his wife is not named. Shua is the man's name. Is that name familiar to anyone?
Tamar? What name?
Shua.
Well, not really.
That's the sixth of the 6 sons of Abraham. Okay? Now, let's go back just a minute. You have Abraham, who is the patriarch's patriarch. And he has 8 sons, beginning with Ishmael, and then Isaac, and then the 6th with Keturah, ending with Shua. Abraham gives great gifts. Basically, he sets the 6 sons up that he has with Keturah for life, in business, capitalizes them, and then sends them off to the east country. He does not want them near to Isaac. He sends them away. He does not want the problem with Isaac that Ishmael is a problem with Isaac. Sends them away. The Canaanites, by this time, were almost, 200 years after Abraham has come into the country. And what we saw, beginning in Canaan, which was first settled by Shem's descendants, remember? Has now descended into idolatry. And as we studied before, God is moving this family, and he's very interested in this family. He moves them out from pagan Aram, out of the influence of Laban, and gets them back into the promised land. And now, all of a sudden, one of them is down in Egypt. In prison eventually, but right now he's sold as a slave. And what we're about to see is that Joseph is safer in Egypt than these guys are up here right now. Eventually, he's going to move the whole family to Egypt. It's a protective move on God's part of that family. But Joseph is going to pay his way. In process of time, the daughter of Shua, this is the 12th verse, Judah's wife died, and Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers in Timnath, and his friend Hira the Adulamite. Now, Timnah, you take a look at your map again, can you find Jerusalem up there, near the top? If you look over to the left, you see Ashdod out on the coast, or near the coast. Timnah is about 3/4 of the way, straight west of Jerusalem, toward Ashdod. That's where Timnah is. And it was told Tamar, saying, Behold, thy father-in-law goes up to Timnah to shear his sheep. And she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnath, where she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, because she had covered her face, and he turned in unto her by the way, and said, Go to, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee, for he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What wilt thou give me that thou mayest come in unto me? Now, just because she's wearing the veil does not indicate that she is a prostitute. Any engaged young woman would have worn a veil. No, she's wearing a veil, and she's covered herself in such a way, and as we go on further, when Hira goes looking for her, he's looking for a cult prostitute, and she would be known by how she dressed.
Looking for a what?
A cult prostitute. Pagan worship involving prostitution. All right, we'll get to that in just a second. And he said, What pledge shall I give thee? And she said, Thy signet, thy bracelets, thy staff is in thy hand. And he gave it to her, and came in unto her, and she conceived by him. And she arose and went away, and laid by her veil from her, and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend the Adulamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, Where is the harlot? Now, I believe if you've got Holman's Christian Standard, if you've got ESV, at this point it will indicate the Hebrew word is now been elevated from harlot to cult prostitute. It's more specific. And, excuse me. Then he asked the men of the place, where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? And they said, there was no harlot in this place. And he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. And also the men of the place said that there was no harlot in this place. And Judah said, let it take it to her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast found her not. It came to pass, about 3 months later, the flocks going to thicken, saying, they came to him, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot, and is also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, bring her forth, and let her be burnt. It's just a thing to do. When she was brought forth, she said to her father-in-law, saying, by the man whose these are, I am with child. And she said, discern, I pray thee, whose are these, the signet, the bracelets, and the staff? And Judah acknowledged them and said, she hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more. And it came to pass in the time of her travail, that behold, twins were in her womb, and it came to pass when she travailed, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. And she said, how hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee, therefore. His name was called Perez. And afterward out came his brother, that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerah. All right, that's a lot of detail packed into chapter 38. So, this is the godly line, is it? Judah, who will be prophesied before this book ends, the tribe to hold the scepter. It's also going to be out of this tribe that Messiah will come. And look what's going on. None of this is excusable. None of it. And you remember our little quote of scripture that God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that will he reap. If you sow to the flesh, you're going to reap flesh. And this is what's going on. Now God, in his care and his provision and his speaking with Abraham, with Isaac and Jacob, everything has been about separation, and I will bless. You're going to, and he's going to magnify this through Joseph, and eventually all the 12 tribes. But he is keeping this separate, and he brings them out of the influence of Laban. He's trying to protect them, or trying, as if God needs to try. He's shielding them from what is pagan influence in Canaan, which is supposed to be their country. It's going to get much, much worse. It's going to get so worse that God will take the entire family and bring them down to Egypt, keep them there for 450 years, and then as they come out, they will deal with what's left of the seeds that are being sown now. And I use that term as a pun, because that's what's going on in this chapter. Seeds being sown or not being sown. We're going to go back to those sons. Judah's sons. The first one is We don't know what he's doing. It's not specified. It was wicked, but God kills him. So that brings on the second son, who is Onan, who takes the wife of the firstborn under a levirate marriage. He's supposed to go in, raise up seed to his brother, so that that brother's line is not lost in the family. And he agrees to do it. He refuses to do it. Now, he agrees publicly, but he refuses privately to do it. So what he is after, that's a business proposition. The oldest son is now dead, which leaves Onan first in line, and he is not going to dilute that inheritance, if he can help it. So no, he's not going to raise up any other seed other than his own. He's not going to share it with, the memory of a dead older brother, even though he promises. And what happens to him? Okay, so the third one is younger, probably not old enough to marry yet, or at least that's the excuse that Judah gives. Tells Tamar to go back to her father's house and live as a widow until Shelah, the younger of the three, is old enough to marry, and then everything's going to be taken care of. Well, it doesn't happen that way, does it? So you have Onan refusing to sow seed as he promised, have Judah going down and sowing seed where it should not be planted. This is an incestuous relationship, although he is unaware of it because of the veil. She is well aware of it and has the proof. She conceives, she has twins. Now, this is the godly line. And all scripture is given by inspiration of God. It is profitable for doctrine, reproof, correction, instruction, and righteousness. Right? We're also told that what we see in the Old Testament is written for our example and our loving admonition. So what applicable lesson would you take from this one today? Now, watch what just happened. How did Esau genuinely lose his birthright? Excuse me, the blessing, not the birthright. He legitimately sold it to Jacob. But how did he lose the blessing?
Deception?
Not Esau.
Oh,
No, it was stolen.
He took 2 Canaanite wives,
Yes, exactly.
which displeased Isaac. It's not blessed of God, certainly not. Now watch what's going on here. Did the 10 brothers sell Joseph to?
The Midianites.
Midianites.
Ishmaelites,
Ishmaelites.
who live in Midian.
Okay.
Then,
These are cousins. Okay? If they're not cousins on Ishmael's side, they're going to be kissing cousins on Midian's side, who is also a brother of Isaac.
now Jay,
Yeah,
in
half
the
brother.
28th verse, it said the Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20. I was thinking,
You thought you had me
I
there.
thought that they sold him to the Midianites and then the Midianites had in turn.
I told you the back table was a troublemaker. This is the tripwire. She's waiting, she's cocked, she's loaded.
I'm going to get him one of these. No, I really
I
thought.
have a map.
I really thought that they had sold them to one, and then the others had sold them
And
again.
be careful with those distinctions, because Midianite and Ishmaelite is not necessarily interchangeable.
Right.
But they
exactly.
can be, depending on
Well, this
who the
one-
Ishmaelites have intermarried with, and they're intermarrying with everybody.
Well, yeah.
But the seed is called in Isaac. That's the separation. So when Esau takes those, and then Esau, after he takes the Canaanite wives, goes off and marries a daughter of Ishmael. Further complicating this web. So here comes Judah and does exactly the same thing. Now, and he does it by reprehensible means. He should not have married the Canaanite. And he knows that. He had a much better Sunday school teacher than you've got. He had Jacob. Jacob had Isaac. They all had Abraham. Those boys lived for 15 years while Abraham was alive. It is in Esau, it's in Jacob, in Esau's lifetime, that Shem passes. His influence is out there. The guy that rides over on the ark on the flood. And they're all family. And they all know the story. So there is no excuse for what's going on. And remember, God is interested in this family. And from this family, he's going to build a nation. And here is what I would suggest is an applicable lesson for today. There isn't anything that we've read in chapter 38 that in the flesh has been done right. And yet you have this guy who all of a sudden turns holier than thou and said, she is more righteous than I. And what she did is no excuse for that. She knows who he may not have known who she was, but she knew who he was. But these are still God's people. This is still God's covenant people. And the covenant and the gifts and callings of God are without repentance. They are irrevocable. That gives you quite a problem, doesn't it?
Paul in Romans 2 then, when he talks about we're all, 2 and 3, we are all sin. We're all none righteous. No, not even one.
So, no, and so for Judah to say that one is more righteous than another is not true, is it? For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. All we like sheep have gone astray, we turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. So this is commented on, from the prophets all the way into the Gospels and epistles. We know this is not, and God still is going to bless the family of Judah with a never-ending scepter and bring Messiah from that family, a prince in the house of David. And David is of the tribe of Judah. Does this make any sense to you?
The only thing I can think of, the thought that comes, it's only the mercy of God and the sovereign choice of God. God's going to do what? It's never based on His grace. It's all about grace. It's all about His choice. It's all about God, so that we might see that it's not by any works of righteousness which we have done, but by His mercy He saved us by the washing of regeneration and the renewing of the Holy Spirit. That's what came to my mind as you speak it.
You're really grinning back there. It's all about redemption, isn't it? You'll never let go of that. And I'm not encouraging you to.
It shows a picture of the flesh is weak.
It is, but very willing. Both to do good and to do evil. The flesh is very willing, but it is weak, and it will fall, and it will stumble, and it will fall. But God is a redeemer. And it will
Scarlet thread.
and it will behoove Him to demonstrate that mercy that He is rich in. Now here's the lesson for those of us who have not quite reached the end of our journey, as Jacob and the others will have in their time. They have done everything wrong. They have done everything wrong. Judah and his family here at this point. Now, number one, they're going to reap that in the flesh, because God will not be mocked. They'll pay for it in the flesh. But God, who is sovereign, also overrules in the affairs of men, which generally are wrong. You can have the best of intentions, the best of ideas, the best of programs, and if God is not in that, it's wood, hay, stubble. And it'll burn. It's worthless. If God is in it, and He stands alone in that covenant, inviting us to join Him in it, that cannot fall. And God will override and overrule. Now I want to show you, I don't mean to belabor this morning, but I want to show you some of the intricacies. And we've talked about the exquisite accuracy of prophecy and manifestation. We are more than 450 years ahead of Moses' time, and Moses is going to write the law. And if you will look at the law, I believe it's Deuteronomy 25. The law of the Levirate marriage is given what Onan refused to do. It's in the Mosaic law. Also in Deuteronomy, the law of illegitimate children is also given. An illegitimate child was forbidden to enter the house of God until the 10th generation.
Oh, yeah.
Firstborn of Judah is what name? What's his name?
Perez.
Phares, yes.
What?
Yeah, Phares.
Okay.
Do you know who he is?
He's David's 10th great-grandfather.
If he'd been the ninth, David would never have been able to write, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. 10th generation, he can go now. Don't think David didn't know that. Don't think Jesse didn't know it, and all the brothers. This is written 450 years before the law. God, these people are not bound by the law, but God is bound by His word. The strong one bound by an oath. That's His word. If it's true when Moses wrote it, it's always true. And David qualifies. David is the man after God's own heart. There's what the choice is, and He's not going to let that choice be overridden by some clown back here before they even go down into Egypt. Won't let it happen. Now, Judah will have a change of heart as we go on with the story. No one redeems himself. That's always the story we hear. They have a better thought about something redeemed. No. The redemption is God's. God's alone to give. And Judah will become part of that. And we'll see that interplay in the family relationship later with a guy called Benjamin. The two eventually become inseparable. This is the guy who said of Joseph, you know, there really is no profit if we kill him.
Who said that again?
Judah.
Oh, yeah.
Let's
Yes.
sell him. Reuben is gone at that point. When Reuben comes back, Joseph is already well on his way to Egypt. But it's Judah that's going to make a money issue out of this, a business proposition with their cousins. So you have the children of Jacob, who are supposed to be separate and distinct, and from whom a nation which is going to be holy unto God, selling their brother to their cousins, no matter how you slice that bread. It's not going to be a further distance than cousins in relationship. And you bet your boots they know each other. Now, then, after that, the business proposition guy, on his way up to shear his sheep, spots a prostitute. And he offers her a business proposition, doesn't he? A goat from the flock, right? Which he doesn't have with him. So he leaves the staff, the signet, and the cord. The cord is probably to hang around the neck that the signet will hang upon. Probably not a signet ring at this point that you would wear on your hand. That's the cord carrying the signet, which is his signature, basically, and can be used by his agent in any business proposition. And he's got one going here. He's acting for himself. And she becomes pregnant with twins, one of whom is going to be the progenitor of King David himself. And all of a sudden, she's nowhere to be found.
Well, you know, another thing is, Tamar, she was a little upset that he hadn't offered Sheila.
She had a right to be.
That's what I'm saying. So, I mean, that didn't give her the right to do what she did.
No, it doesn't. No, it does not.
But, however, she was a little disgusted
And
because he had said once he got to age.
He promised her.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Yes, he did. Have we seen this go on before in Genesis? You've got Rebecca with the promise of God that her favorite is going to be the blessed one. And what does she do?
Yeah.
Deceives and lies to the other son and to her husband. Sowing to the flesh. And from that point, and the lie that she tells, the lie that Jacob tells, and what it does, you see how that never leaves that family dynamic? This family from that point on has no peace among these brothers. It gets down to the point where, yeah, Esau wanted to kill Jacob, and he had at least 9 of them who wanted to kill Joseph. Judah turns that around by making it a business proposition. They come out 20 pieces of silver richer, and they have just provided the way of redemption down to Egypt, where they are not supposed to go. You want to talk about Providence of God? Who knows the end from the beginning? And provides for his children? Provides for you, provides for me. Before we have knowledge of the need, the one who can say eventually before they call, I will answer. That's the God who's writing the book that we're reading this morning. Another mistake that Judah makes, and from this one there's almost no return after Abraham leaves Ur, that business about the cult prostitute that he thought she was. Now, what is he joining himself to?
Idols.
Yes, it's idolatry, it's paganism, and it is what will destroy every named race in that land. With the exceptions of some of the Moabites who lighted Joshua about who they are. The Philistines, they can't drive out. The Canaanites are wiped out. Jebusites are wiped out. And it's because of two things. The idolatry, the paganism, and what that leads to, the sacrifice of children, to Moloch, that was all going on there. And this has already started. That system of paganism that they're warned all through that Elijah ministry, you leave Baal alone, you leave that, you don't even inquire to this. The seeds are already starting.
So in the New Testament, when it says, little children, keep yourselves from idols, that warning there is that same, what we see played out here, is the fact that it is absolutely against, it's, you shall have no other gods besides me. It violates God's command, but it also has, the effect is it's a substitute, what did Jacob do when he substituted truth, he substituted something, right, for doing what was right? What's the
Jacob's concern was misplaced. Jacob was concerned for his safety, which was already guaranteed by God.
He's trying to get a hold of it, fulfill what?
Absolutely. He's going to fool his dad for the money, or the blessing.
Yeah.
He's going to, fire sale prices for the birthright. And he gets Esau so mad at him, he has to flee for his life. He thinks Esau's going to kill him. And who knows, he may have. Now he leaves Padan Aram for the same reason. He gets Laban so mad at him that he's fleeing with his family.
Yeah.
He wants to kill him. He comes in force. But all of this was, from the time of Bethel, even before he wrestles with the angel, God says, okay, I'll be with you, and I will bless you. And basically, you get the restatement of the Abrahamic covenant in him, and I've got to make this work. I've got to make this work.
And so we see that replicated in Judah then.
Judah's going to make everything work commercially.
So he's right, but he's got that same tendency. Instead of just trusting God, he's trying to work it out himself then? Is that?
There's every indication of that, yes. This is a game of wits, and the world will always construe by its wits. We have the Word of God, and we have the promise of God. You want to construe by something, there's a light to shine on your path ahead. That's part of the problem. We will not do it either. That's not our first impulse. We're still sitting here with this old nature, in this flesh, fallen flesh. What's the song from the gospel hymn? Greatly blessed, highly favored, imperfect but forgiven child of God. Okay, that's our situation, and we're seeing it in spades right here.
Yeah.
If you don't mind that terminology. But he goes out, not only joins himself to what he believes is a harlot, to a pagan temple prostitute. As much as a temple prostitute as what was going on in Corinth, that gave Paul so much problem, which gave the old Roman soldiers the motto, not every soldier is lucky enough to be stationed in Corinth. It's that bad. These are the seeds, and it is, and don't take your eyes off this. This is Babylon coming to fruition. This is what this is. All false worship, all false religion, all false doctrine has its beginning in Babylon. Now, Babylon has been destroyed, but those seeds were planted and they grow. They mature, and they will produce a harvest in those who accept the seed.
Hey, Jay.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting to me is this character, Hira.
Yeah.
Hira's always just right there.
Well, that's what friends are for.
I mean, yeah, Hira, the Adulamite, that's who he hooks up with first in verse 1. Then all of a sudden he meets this Canaanite woman. Then I still don't understand 12.
Verse 12?
Yeah.
And in process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died.
We don't hear of a daughter being born.
The daughter of Shua
I know.
is Judah's wife.
Two, right? Yeah, sure.
What now?
The daughter of Shua is Judah's wife.
Yes.
Shua is a man, yeah.
The Judah saw there was a daughter of this. Oh, I see.
Here's,
Oh, see, no, I confused that. In
Okay.
verse 2, that Judah saw there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua.
Yes.
The Canaanite was Shua,
yes.
and his daughter was not named Shua.
And Shua is the sixth son of
I see, okay.
Keturah, Abraham's second wife.
And went and took her, okay. So we don't know his wife's
Wife's
name.
We do not know her name. She's never
Ah,
named.
okay.
Tamar is named, but not her mother.
And so he was
Excuse
comforted.
me, not his
And
mother.
you know, whenever I've ever dealt with a widower, you know, most of them just go right up to their sheep shearers to get a little comfort.
Okay, well, okay, it says, in process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted. That's a 40-day mourning period, was comforted.
Okay.
You remember when the steward...
So then he went up to his sheep shearers
it goes up to
with
Timnah.
his buddy Hira.
Yeah, they make quite a little journey.
Uh-huh. Good old Hira.
And they're not just walking along, two guys along a desert path here. This is known that these two guys are on the move because Tamar is informed by
Right.
her father-in-law.
But good old Hira's right there to say, hey.
Oh, yeah, and act as his agent on bringing the payment for the, basically, well, without being too crass about it, there was a time when I was sitting in the gallery of the House of Representatives in Olympia, and there was a state representative from the east side says, and the microphone on his desk is open, he doesn't know it, and he turns over to receipt me, and he says, I have no idea what to do with the prostitution bill.
Who's the what?
Was this prostitution bill was up for consideration. And Ruth Fisher from Tacoma leans into her microphone and she says, pay it. That's what's going on here. Hira is going up to pay and to reclaim
Yeah, the guarantee.
the guarantee, the pledge.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
Now-
why didn't he,
Why didn't he
well,
want?
nothing. I was gonna say, why didn't he see that the Sheila was taken, but he wasn't interested in that.
Well, this,
I mean, it wouldn't have done him any good.
there is some conjecture on why he does not give, why he doesn't enforce the levirate marriage on the third son. And it may be that he viewed Tamar as being unlucky, that he'd lose the third son too. Doesn't say,
Oh, yeah.
she doesn't
I
say
can
that he
see
is aware of the wickedness of the older son or the commission of the sin by Onan in refusing to raise up seed to the brother. The lie, it doesn't say that he's aware of that. But no, he's not giving that third son. He's not taking, the third one's not gonna be the charge. So are we clear on who Shua is? This family that is so interested, which so closely holds God's interest, as this family affair going on has become very, very sordid. Left to our own devices, that's what happens, and it leads to what is a glaring, very, very evident public immorality, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Read your newspaper. Watch the news. Watch what happens to a cultic religious practice and where it leads. It will lead to sexual, first, immorality, and then perversion in that order, and it is inevitable. That is why God uses, this is my view, I say this is why. In my view, this is why I think God uses sexual immorality for spiritual infidelity. This is apparent. This we can see. Now, he sees spiritual infidelity, unfaithfulness, in the way that we can view what happens in the flesh. He sees it going on in the spirit. And one is just as odious as the other. That is why she is no more righteous than Judah. Judah is no less righteous than she, because neither one of them are righteous. None of us are. But God is able to take that condition, that situation in which we normally find ourselves being placed by ourselves and overridden. That grace is sufficient for thee. There's your promise. My grace is sufficient for thee. And that's backed up with the pledge that God, who is rich in mercy, extends the grace. Do we know the difference between mercy and grace? Come on.
Mercy is not giving us what we deserve. Grace is giving us what we don't deserve.
We always said it this way. Mercy is forgiveness, and grace is mercy when you've proven you don't deserve it.
Exactly.
It's easy to remember, but exactly the way you said it.
Exactly.
And he's,
Pastor Rick is.
That's how
he's willing to do the one, and he's rich in the other.
Say what?
God is willing to extend the grace, and he's rich in the mercy.
Okay.
Long suffering.
Yeah, see, there's no catch-22 to be, which really prevents us from accessing that, unless we put it there. And Judah's doing his very best to put it there. The obstacle. He's joining himself to what he believes is a cult prostitute, false worship, in the promised land. Now, how would you spell abomination? Now, when they left, when the family left, when these are just young men, Joseph is just a little boy, and they leave Pagan Aram. What does Rachel bring with her from her father's house?
Yeah, idols.
Household idols.
See the seeds?
The father's household.
Which
idols.
leads to the earrings, the public declaration of the idols they were carrying, because he tells them, we're going up to Bethel, get rid of the idols, break off the earrings, which are a witness to the idols, and change your habits, change your garments.
Put off the sin, put on, New Testament. Paul says, put off the, Hebrews says,
Well, basically,
Hebrews 12:1.
yes, but basically what you have and what Jacob is foreshadowing here is when God comes down to Moses and he says, you prepare the people. This is at Sinai. This is at Horeb. Tell them to wash their clothes. Don't you tell them to get ready for me because I'm coming down. And he's telling them to do everything that Jacob's telling his family when they're heading up to Bethel. The house of God. That's what Bethel is.
Oh,
Jay,
We
there's
are-
something else really beautiful about this. This chapter sits in the middle of this story of Joseph.
yeah.
Even structure is inspired because he's giving us the fact that the Abrahamic covenant is going to continue despite our messes. Through Judah, but he's going to redeem them, and Joseph who's in Egypt, and he puts it plotted right in the middle of this, and this beautiful, this story of Joseph. So,
Which is a hallmark of Jewish literature, the overarching narrative, where you'll have the story begin this way, and then the arc will start again from in there, and we look at it as parenthetical because we write. They write in parallel. Yes, and what you have in this, what we would say is the parentheses, is the protection of Joseph. This is the way back to the garden, folks. That's who it is. Okay? And I will say again, the angel, that cherubim with the sword is guard the way back. It's not to keep us out. It was never the intention. It was God's first intention to put us there, and he will have us there. If you can receive it. Questions, comments, gripes, complaints? I see that hand.
I think the woman, Hannah, she had a total different agenda than he had. And when he says, I'm not giving you any more sons, she immediately began to say, I'm gonna watch what he does, and I'm gonna form this plan.
He didn't
Absolutely.
say that.
You know what
He
she
never
wants.
said that.
You know what she wants.
Yeah.
She wants a child. And
But
if
Judah never did say that I'm not gonna give you another son. He just
He just didn't
neglected.
give the other son.
He just neglected to do it, but he never told
It's
her.
kind of like actions speak louder than words, but if he doesn't give that third son, she's the widow the rest of her life
Right.
under the levirate marriage, and she's not gonna stand for that. And she catches him in his own line by lying to him. Any other questions, observations, comments? I see the pastor's on his feet, in the starting blocks, ready to go. Frank, would you close in prayer for us, please?